Welcome to part 2 of our transom replacement video. This is where we're actually going to rebuild the transom. First step, get a template made of the actual transom area. We'll start there. If anybody else has got some great ideas on how to make a template for a transom, I'd absolutely love to hear them. Because originally I thought I was going to be able to jump in here with some pieces of cardboard from some delivery boxes and whip out a template, and that just isn't what happened. It was actually a lot tougher than I thought it was going to be. So this is what I ended up doing. And what you see here is this is painter's tape, and I just covered the entire back of this transom with painter's tape, which should release easily, at least that's the idea, and then went around the edges with a much stiffer brand of tape. The idea there is hopefully that'll help it hold its shape. Here I've gone ahead and I've made a foam board base for this template. And ideally, we're going to be able to pull this off and place it on this template, trace around it, cut it, and then bring it to boat outfitters to have our Coosa board made. I'm going to see if this comes off the way I'm hoping it does. Pieces of painter's tape. Didn't want to pull right. Well, we got our template done and it fits in pretty well. We did make one little mistake that next time I would definitely try to adjust. And what the mistake was is this fiberglass that's on here is so thin without any board in there that it's actually bowed out. So when I made the tape frame, it was actually bowed, and then when we went to go set it on the ground over there, it wasn't flat, so it didn't fit quite right. So to do this again, I would find some way to make this transom straight while I was taping it, because then when you lay it out, it'll be flat. This looks pretty good. We'll get this over to boat outfitters. So we got our 1.5 ounce chop strand cut, just like the template here. What I'm going to do first is wet out the board, and then I'm going to lay this down and then come back over this with a paint roller. So we're mixing up Moss 5-in-1, so that's, or 5-2-1 rather. So that's going to be 5 parts of this to 1 part of the slow hardener. So to do that, I am going to use 150 milliliters. I'm sorry, I'm going to use 250 milliliters. That would be 5 parts. Oh, there's 100 milliliters. $200 milliliters. 250 milliliters. That's our epoxy. So just like we did with that piece of Coosa board, we're doing the back of the transom with an 1.5 ounce piece of chop strand mat. I just wet it out on the back, and now I'm just finishing up rolling it out on the front, getting all the air bubbles out. After that, we're going to put a coat of 1708 biaxle on this to add structural support before we put the actual Coosa board down. Our 1.5 ounce chop strand has now been completely dried in. We've cleaned it up. I'm going to give it a little acetone bath before we start with this next step, which is the 1708 biaxial cloth. This is going to be for structure. Now, normally we'd be laying this chop strand in, but in this case, we want the chop strand to be the bite for that transom or Coosa board that we've got. So we're going to actually lay this woven side in. We're going to start by wetting this out here, and then we're going to wet this cloth in. I've got it running up a little high because I want to strengthen up some of this portion of the boat where it's gotten extremely thin over the years. We're going to have to use some panhead screws to put the two parts of the boat back together. Let's get going. Just going to start by wetting out the now dry layer of 1.5 ounce chop strand. Hopefully that's a bit of a cheat and gets some epoxy on the back side of that 1708. I'm just finishing up the wetting out of the 1708 biaxial. I left some additional at the top here, which I'm hoping works out all right. I'm going to take the oscillating saw and make a new edge on this top because it was pretty chewed up just from taking the boat apart. A little worried it's a little windy today, so that's blowing around a little bit and I can't really wet up that high, so just kind of doing the best I can to get this attached up at the top. Hopefully the reaction sets in soon and stuff starts hardening up a little bit. Got our board set up here. These are 2 pieces of Coosa board that we're about to clamp together. We're going to actually glue them together with thickened epoxy, which we'll get into in a minute. The plan here is we've got this piece, which already has our layer of 1.5 ounce chop strand on it, and then this layer has nothing. You can't use regular epoxy on this. It needs to be a stronger bond, so we're going to use thickened. I've got this set up on some 2 2x4s and then some cross boards, and hopefully the idea is that we get a good clamp all the way across. We'll see how that works out. This is our regular epoxy mixture, and I'm about to start adding this West Systems 403 microfibers adhesive filler into this. Hopefully a little at a time. We'll add a little and start mixing it up, and this is how we're going to make our thickened epoxy. And what we're looking for here is a consistency that's somewhere between mayonnaise and peanut butter for a thickness. That's not going to be very close right there. Add some more.
That's weird.
We're just spreading our mixed thickened epoxy out on both sides of this board. Thickener is going to give us a little more dwell time while we get these two clamped together. You can see we've got a pretty good coat on both sides. We're definitely looking for some of this to seep out of all the edges once we clamp it together. We will be putting that together in just a second here. We've got our transom board cleaned up, sanded around the edges, and we're finally going to drop this in here today. Because I don't have anything deeper than a 12-inch C-clamp, I've rigged this up with 2x4s, and I'm going to use a single screw and just kind of hammer this down and hopefully apply pressure to the lower third of this transom board so we've got even pressure. We're going to be using thickened epoxy with West 403 to get the right consistency here. So we'll start mixing this up, pull the board, and get her back in here. We got our thickened epoxy laid out on our transom board. I've rolled it out on the existing fiberglass over there. So we're going to go ahead and set this in here and get it clamped up. Right. Seems pretty good. Well, we've got our transom board placed here. As you can see, we've got a lot of clamps on here, ranging from 12 inches in the midsection all the way up to 4 inches for the top, and we've got our wood pressing in on the bottom, hopefully. So we'll let this set and dry overnight, and then we'll come back around and fill this gap in with some really thickened epoxy. Our transom board is in and set, solid as a rock, but we are going to go ahead and fill in the bottom and the sides now with some thickened epoxy. We got that West 403. I'm just going to try like I'm cooking in the kitchen, stuffing cannellones. I've got it in a plastic bag. I'm going to squeeze it out, smooth it with this spoon. So the science behind this is pretty solid. It would have worked. It is working. But I did make a mistake, and that was using a bag that had a pleated bottom on it. So if you try this method, make sure the bag doesn't have the pleated bottom, because it makes the corner very difficult to squeeze evenly. Everything's set now. This is our bead of thickened epoxy around all the edges, filling in the gap, forming one solid piece end to end, and it is pretty darn solid right now. So the next thing to do is to bust out the grinder again. We've got a couple important things to do. Clean up all this, because we're going to be putting some 1708 around the edges and our final layer of 1708 over the entire transom. But this is also at an angle and needs to be level. So we're going to be grinding this down so this is actually level with what would be the water, because that's the way our top portion of the boat sits. So not my favorite thing to do, but we're gonna do it. So we got all this sanded down smooth. I'm really happy with the way this turned out. Everything seems extremely solid. I softened the edge of this up here just because fiberglass doesn't really like 90-degree angles. So we rounded that a little bit, and we're setting up to take our last layer of 1708. Not only are we going to put that on there, but we're also going to then after that wrap the edges to strengthen it to the side of the boat. So that's the next step. So we're done here. We didn't film it because when we started to get everything ready, we ran into a typical problem here in Florida, and that was weather started rolling in. So we decided that it was probably better to bust our butts to get this done quickly rather than set up for a film shot. But all we were really doing is putting another layer of 1708 chop strand mat back on the Coosa board. And as you can see, it came out very nicely. Everything looks good, solid. One last step here though, and that is this is 30-year-old fiberglass in the corners. And I still worry that since we're upping the horsepower, that the torque might be a little bit too much. So the last thing we're gonna do is we're gonna take some of that pressure off this seam. We're gonna do that by adding some 1708 to these corners like this. I've got it laid out. We're gonna obviously add epoxy to it. This is gonna take some of the stress off this right here, spread that that load out a little bit. So that's what we're gonna do now. Well, here we are with our finished transom. We've reinforced the sides. And right now this thing is super strong. I guarantee it's stronger than it was when this boat was built in 1987. And we saved thousands of dollars doing this. Believe me, if I can do this, you can do it. If you liked it, please give us a like, subscribe to the channel. We'll be back with some updates on this boat project later on. See you later.